Welcome. Today, you're not just watching a speech, you are witnessing a shift in destiny. This isn't about war, it's about awakening asterisk. It's about a nation that once stood silent, now speaking through action. It's about strength wrapped in peace, power wrapped in purpose. When a country rises not with pride, but with clarity, that's when the world listens. And today, we uncover the moment India proved that silence is not weakness, and restraint is not fear. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a spiritual reminder of what true strength really looks like. The moment of truth, Pakistan's deputy PM confession. In the world of geopolitics, confessions are rare. When a nation admits weakness, especially in public, it signals something deeper than diplomacy. It reveals a shift in power, a crack in the illusion of control. That's exactly what happened when Pakistan's deputy prime minister admitted they asked for a ceasefire after India struck their airbases. It wasn't just a statement, it was a moment of truth that spoke volumes about what really happened behind the scenes. For years, Pakistan maintained a bold posture, pushing rhetoric, stirring narratives, and challenging India across borders, militarily, politically, and through propaganda. But when India responded, not with words, but with precision strikes on key airbases, everything changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was clean, calculated, and clear. And it shook the core of Pakistan's defense thinking. The deputy PM admission wasn't a media spin, it was a reality check, a recognition that when India decides to act, it doesn't shout, it strikes, and the result isn't just physical damage, it's psychological. It tells the adversary, you've crossed a line, and this is your consequence. That confession also revealed something the world often overlooks. India's strength isn't just in its weapons. It's in its discipline, in its refusal to escalate without purpose, and in its ability to deliver impact without noise. When Pakistan asked for a ceasefire, it wasn't out of diplomacy. It was out of necessity. Because it realized in that moment that India had the upper hand, and in the realm of national security, when your enemy asks for peace after you strike, it's no longer just a military operation. It's a message. A message that says, this is the new India, we don't provoke. But if you push, we will finish it with silence and strength. Real power doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't rely on noise, hashtags, or headlines. It speaks through action, and when India launched its precision airstrikes on Pakistani airbases, it didn't scream for the world's attention. It moved like a shadow, quiet, focused, and exact. That's the mark of silent strength, the kind that doesn't seek validation because truth speaks louder than applause. India didn't strike to show off, it struck to defend, and it did so with clarity, not chaos. While politicians and media around the world speculated, argued, and spun their versions of the truth, India stayed focused. It didn't threaten on Twitter. It didn't gloat in press conferences. It didn't light up the airwaves with patriotic noise. Instead, it let the operation speak for itself. That silence sent a louder message than any headline ever could. Because silence backed by strength is terrifying to an adversary. It's unpredictable. It's unstoppable. When a nation shows it can act without warning, without drama, and without delay, it gains not just military advantage. It earns psychological dominance. The world watched carefully. Allies admired the restraint. Adversaries recalculated their moves, and the public saw something they hadn't seen before. A new India, one that no longer flinched, no longer waited, and no longer sought anyone's permission to protect its people. That's the kind of power that lasts, not the kind that burns bright for a moment, but the kind that simmers with discipline and direction. India's silence wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. It was control. And when combined with decisive action, it became the loudest statement in the room. Because when you're truly strong, you don't need to shout. You just need to move once, and the world listens. There are moments in history when action speaks with a force that words can never match. India's surgical strikes on Pakistan's airbases were one of those moments. It wasn't just an operation, it was a statement. A clear message that India will not be a silent spectator when its security is challenged, its borders violated, or its people put in harm's way. These were not random retaliations. They were surgical, precise, and purposeful. India didn't carpet bomb or escalate into war. It chose targets with intention. It struck only what needed to be struck. That's what separates retaliation from strategy, restraint with power. These strikes showed the world that India had the intelligence, capability, and confidence to execute complex missions without creating chaos. It was discipline in motion. The strikes weren't just military success stories. They were psychological game changers. For years, there had been a belief that India would always hold back, always take the diplomatic route, always prioritize peace. But these surgical strikes shattered that assumption. They showed that while India values peace, it does not fear war. And if provoked, it will strike with such precision that even the aggressor won't see it coming. What made the strikes more powerful was India's silence after. No boasting, no chest thumping, just a calm return to readiness that shook the enemy more than the missiles. Because when your opponent hits hard and then goes quiet, you begin to understand the seriousness of their intent. These surgical strikes were not just about punishing a provocation. They were about redefining India's posture. No longer reactive, no longer hesitant. India proved it could be swift, surgical, and still stand with moral authority. And that level of clarity is what truly made those strikes louder than any declaration ever could. It's easy to provoke with words, to stand before cameras and speak of strength, to beat the drums of nationalism when there is no immediate cost. But what happens when those words meet action? What happens when the other side doesn't just respond, but responds with precision and purpose? That's exactly what Pakistan faced when India struck its airbases, not with noise, but with calculated power. In the days leading up to the strike, Pakistan projected boldness. Rhetoric flew, threats echoed, and the usual posturing filled the airwaves. But when the Indian Air Force crossed the threshold and hit critical targets, the tone changed overnight. That fiery confidence turned into sudden silence, then into diplomatic urgency. The very nation that claimed strength was now seeking a ceasefire. This wasn't a peaceful gesture. It was a strategic retreat. Pakistan knew that escalation would only expose more vulnerabilities. The strike had landed not just on air bases, but on the illusion of control. And in that moment, the only option left was to de-escalate, to request calm, to reach out for talks. India didn't gloat. It didn't capitalize on Pakistan's retreat to humiliate. Instead, it maintained composure. That's what made the retreat even more obvious, because it wasn't forced by negotiations. It was triggered by a display of power that Pakistan wasn't prepared for. This admission of requesting a ceasefire wasn't just political. It was psychological submission. It showed the world that the dynamics had shifted, that India's restraint is a choice, not a weakness, and that provocation without preparation leads to exposure. Pakistan provoked. India responded, and when reality set in, all that was left for Pakistan to do was ask for peace from the very nation it once tried to intimidate. That's the cost of underestimating calm power. For decades, the balance of power in South Asia was seen through an outdated lens. It was a story where India was expected to absorb pressure, play the patient negotiator, and avoid escalation no matter the provocation. But that narrative was rewritten the day India responded with strength and clarity, striking Pakistan's airbases with precision. From that moment, the pace of power shifted, and it shifted in India's favor. India didn't act out of impulse. It acted out of resolve. The strikes were swift, strategic, and carefully measured, and they left no room for confusion. India showed that it no longer waits for global sympathy before defending itself. It doesn't seek approval to act in self-interest. It sets its own timeline, its own red lines, and its own terms of engagement. That is power, not just the ability to retaliate, but the ability to control the tempo of the conflict. After the airstrikes, Pakistan didn't retaliate with equal force. It didn't escalate as it had threatened. It backed down. It asked for dialogue. That is not coincidence. That is consequence. This shift isn't just military. It's diplomatic. India is no longer reacting to agendas set by others. It is now the one shaping discussions, leading with strength, and forcing adversaries to rethink their strategies. The world saw that when Pakistan asked for a ceasefire, it wasn't India bending to pressure. It was Pakistan responding to it. India's leadership stood tall, its military executed with precision, its people stood united, and its adversary blinked first. That's what it means to dictate the pace, not by shouting, not by overreaching, but by moving with confidence when it matters most. And now every player in the region knows India is not just participating in the game, it's controlling it. In international affairs, respect isn't handed out freely. It's not gained through speeches or statements. It's earned through action, discipline, and clarity of intent. When India struck Pakistan's airbases with precision, the world didn't just take notice. It took India seriously, and that's where the real shift occurred. India didn't ask for global validation. It didn't launch a media campaign to justify itself. It simply acted, decisively, responsibly, and with restraint. That kind of response earns more than attention. It earns respect. Global powers watched the situation unfold with caution. But what they saw was a nation that had the capability to hit back, the intelligence to strike precisely, and the wisdom to de-escalate without compromise. They saw a country that values peace, but is not afraid of force when pushed too far. And in that, they saw leadership. Countries that previously viewed India as the more reserved power began to acknowledge its new posture. Quiet strength, backed by action, changes the tone in international diplomacy. India didn't scream threats. It followed through on a promise to protect its sovereignty. And when it did, even those nations sitting on the sidelines began to respect its maturity and military precision. This wasn't a moment of war. It was a moment of measured dominance. And the West, which often lectures others on diplomacy and power, saw a rising India that didn't need to follow their blueprint. Instead, India demonstrated a model of self-control under pressure, guided by principle, not provocation, that earned something more powerful than headlines. It earned credibility. In 2025 and beyond, global respect isn't just about alliances. It's about how you move when the world is watching. And in that moment, India showed it didn't need to demand respect. It commanded it, quietly, powerfully, permanently. Leadership is truly revealed not in comfort, but in crisis. When tension rises, when threats are made, and when the world watches your every move, that's when true leaders are tested. And during one of the most critical moments in recent Indo-Pak history, India's leadership stood tall, calm, and unshaken. No overreaction, no political drama, just measured, focused decision, making rooted in national interest and moral clarity. When Pakistan escalated its rhetoric and provocation, the world expected India to respond either with delay or desperation. But what followed was neither. India's leaders didn't fall into the trap of reacting emotionally. They assessed the situation, weighed every option, and chose a response that was swift, surgical, and absolutely clear in intent. That calmness under fire sent a message not only to Pakistan but to the entire world. This is not the India of the past. This is an India led by minds that refuse to be rattled, by hearts that do not waver, and by hands that do not shake when duty calls. In that moment, diplomacy wasn't discarded. It was elevated. Because true diplomacy isn't weakness. It's knowing when to speak and when to strike. India did both, and it did so with maturity the world could not ignore. The pressure was immense. International media spinning narratives, allies offering advice, adversaries watching closely. Yet India stayed grounded, and that's what real leadership looks like. When you don't move with panic, you move with purpose. And when you act with clarity, you become immovable. India's leadership showed the world that restraint is not submission, and patience is not passivity. It showed that real power lies in choosing your moment, owning your action, and never losing your center. Even when the storm is raging around you, that's leadership, that's legacy. There was a time when India was expected to absorb every blow, stay silent through every insult, and respond with nothing more than diplomacy, even in the face of provocation. But that India is gone. What the world is witnessing now is a new India. An India that listens carefully, responds wisely, and when necessary, strikes with precision and power. It's not reckless. It's not emotional. It's resolute. When India struck back after its airbases were threatened, it didn't act to prove anything to the world. It acted because the line had been crossed. This wasn't a show of force for attention. It was a demonstration of resolve. And when Pakistan asked for a ceasefire after the strike, the world understood something it had long underestimated. India is not the nation you can push around anymore. This new India does not seek validation from global powers. It doesn't react out of fear or insecurity. It moves with clarity, with purpose, and with the full understanding that its people, its soldiers, and its sovereignty are not negotiable. The most powerful part of this transformation is that India doesn't need to announce it. The shift is visible in how it carries itself, in global summits, in conflict zones, in trade talks, and on the battlefield. There is steel behind the silence and strength behind the calm. India has matured, not only in military and economy, but in mindset. It no longer plays defense by default. It draws red lines and it means it. That's why the narrative is changing. That's why even those who once doubted are now watching closely. Because this India, it walks differently, it speaks differently, and most importantly, it can't be pushed anymore. It decides when to act, how to act, and why to act, and that changes everything. India's message is clear: we don't seek war, but we will never bow to pressure. The day Pakistan's deputy PM admitted they asked for a ceasefire wasn't just a diplomatic moment. It was history catching up to truth. India didn't shout, it acted, and that action shifted the balance of power forever. The world now knows this is a new India, calm, capable, unshakable. Thank you for standing in truth. Stay strong, stay informed, and never forget who you are. The future belongs to the bold and the awake. Good luck on your journey, and thank you for being part of ours.